Well, good morning. We are now on day 20 of our study. It's been quite a few weeks that we've all been locked down. I hope you're doing okay. It, from what we're hearing on the news, it looks like things are improving, things are getting better, and that's a huge praise. And hopefully soon things will start to get back to normal. But hang in there, stay positive. We're going to be in Mark's Gospel this morning, chapter 4, verses 35 down through 41. And I just want to warn you before we talk about this particular passage, more than any other passage I've ever taught on, this one has gotten me into trouble. I've had more people come up to me and say how wrong I was and that they didn't like it, what have you. So bear with me. I didn't think it was a controversial passage. It's really not. It's just my approach to it. A lot of people didn't like. So, with that in mind, now you're curious, what on earth is this passage about? It's a story of Jesus calming the storm after he had been asleep in the boat. When my first son Tyler was born, the day that I became a parent, July 16th, 1988, I remember my sister's family had driven up to Fresno where we lived at the time, and they were visiting and they were excited to see the new baby. And my brother-in-law Mark had, tell you how long ago this was. He had a video camera, the kind you mount on your shoulder like a news crew, and we were in the hospital and we were filming everything. We filmed the nurses. It was a very small hospital. We were the only people in the maternity ward, so we had the run of the place. We were filming the nurses. We went into the nursery and filmed Tyler, the only baby in there, and then we went into Debbie's room to film her, and she was sound asleep. She was laying in bed, just sound asleep. So we don't want to disturb her. So we closed the door and we crept out. And later, a few weeks after that, when we're sitting there watching this video and we got to that part, Debbie said, I was wide awake. I was pretending to be asleep. I said, why? She said, I was exhausted. And the last thing I wanted to deal with, these are my wife's exact words, by the way. The last thing I want to deal with were two idiots with a movie camera. Okay. Sometimes you pretend to be asleep for whatever reason. In this passage today, as they're on the boat, as Jesus and his apostles are crossing the Sea of Galilee, and there's this huge storm coming along, Jesus, according to Scripture, is asleep in the boat. But here's my question. Now, please don't be too hard on me, and if you disagree with me, that's fine. Was Jesus really asleep? How do you sleep through something like that? Let's look at the passage here. We'll start in verse 35. It says, that day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with them. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, that's the back of the boat, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? This was serious. Remember, these apostles, what did several of them do for a living? They fished. They fished on this lake. They knew what storms were like. If they were scared, this was serious. It's like being on an airplane and you hit turbulence, let me say that word right. And if you look at the stewardess and she starts going, what was that? Now you have reason to panic. That's what was happening here. These experienced fishermen were terrified by this storm. And they go to Jesus and they wake him up. Don't you care if we drown? The boat was nearly swamped, which meant everybody's drenched. How is Jesus still asleep if all this water's coming into the boat? Throw cold water on a sleeping person, and what do? They wake up. I remember on one of our trips to Africa, we had gone up Lake Tanganyika to see the chimpanzees. They were in a place called Gombe. These were the chimpanzees that Jane Goodall worked with and studied. We went to see them. It was about a 2-hour boat ride up Lake Tanganyika. On the way back, a storm hit. And let me tell you what the storm was like. We were on a boat that could comfortably hold about 50 people or so. There was a hand railing along the side of the boat. In the midst of the storm, at one point, the boat was listing so far, the handrail that you hold on to was underwater. This was serious. We were rocking back and forth. I was determined not to throw up. I hadn't thrown up since 1974. Don't ask me why I was keeping track, but I was, and I was determined not to. And let me tell you, I didn't throw up. You know what else I didn't do? I didn't fall asleep. You don't sleep in a boat during a storm like this. So if Jesus wasn't asleep, why was he pretending then to be asleep? Whatever reason he was doing this for had to have something to do with what he was teaching his apostles. So, what was he teaching them? And I completely lost my place in my notes. So let me find it again. Oh, there we go. Let's read verses 39 and 40. It says, he got up, he rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? So in a panic, they wake him up. And what does Jesus do? He tells the weather to knock it off. Think about this. He told the weather to stop doing what it was doing. You ever try that? Good luck. You know what you're supposed to do when it rains? Let it. There's nothing we can do. Jesus tells the weather to stop it. All right? So now we're back to the question. What was Jesus trying to teach these apostles? I mean, this was a very powerful example of Jesus's abilities. But what was he teaching him here? Well, put yourself in the apostles' place for a moment. What was on their mind right now? You see, a big event had just taken place. Shortly before this, remember, the religious leaders had said, well, Jesus he has power, but he gets that power from Satan. He's casting out demons by the power of Satan. That was a huge breaking point. That was a huge turning point in Jesus' ministry. From that point on, he said, I'm not going to teach the Pharisees anymore. I'm not going to allow them to blaspheme and ridicule my teachings like this. Now, this was a big moment for the apostles, too. These guys were Jews. They had grown up learning about the law, learning about the covenants, learning about their history. Who did they learn it from? The religious leaders. And now Jesus has declared himself broken away from the religious leaders. At this point, if you were one of those apostles, wouldn't you, at least in the back of your mind, have this tiny thought of, did I make the right choice? Because I just left everything I know. I've just left everything I base my life on. I'm a Jew. These religious leaders, they were who we followed. They were who we learned from. They were who we got the truth from. And now we're out on our own, following this new guy. Did we make the right choice? So with that in their mind, did we make the right choice? Now, in the midst of this storm, Jesus has an opportunity to show them, I want you to understand who you're dealing with. So if you disagree with this, that's fine. I think Jesus was laying back there going, I'm going to let this storm really, really get bad. I'm going to let these guys get into a complete panic. I'm just going to pretend to not be doing anything. I'm going to be back here just taking a doze. And they run to him because they don't know what else to do. These are fishermen. They should know how to get through a storm like this. But this storm is so bad, it's overwhelmed even then. And now in desperation, they come to him and say, don't you care that we're dying? How can you sleep during this? And what does he do? He tells the weather to knock it off. At that point, they had to be thinking, who are we really following? We weren't sure before, but look at the power and look at the authority that this guy has. If you are a follower of Jesus, you have to have given something up. You can't take the sin. You can't take living for the self. You can't take living for the world with you when you come to Jesus. It's going to require giving something up. For many people, it requires giving up some type of addiction. For others, it means giving up some kind of unhealthy relationship. But you can't drag a lot of this baggage with you. For some, it might mean giving up friends, maybe even family. And you have to ask yourself at some point, is it worth it? I want you to understand, It is worth it. When you really grasp and consider who we are following, who Jesus is, what he's all about, he's worth it. He is worth it. He's worth whatever we have to give up to follow. I want to close by telling you one more Africa story. One of my good friends there, and we just got back a month ago and we got to see Shukuru, who's one of my favorite people in the world. Shukuru is the guy, he's kind of like their version of Jim Watkins. If there's something that needs to be fixed, Shukuru does it. He's a maintenance guy, but he's more than that. He keeps that place physically running. And he and his wife Julianne are just delightful people, and I love their kids. And I remember once we were having dinner over at Shakuru's house, and this was the year. This was our second time there. It was the same trip as we had that horrible boat experience. But we're having dinner with them, and Shakuru was telling me about the fact that his father had just come to visit him. I thought, "Oh, well, that's nice. His father came to visit him. That's always good to see your dad." And it wasn't until later that somebody else was telling me, "I don't think you understand what that meant." Shakuru's father is Muslim. Shakuru had grown up a Muslim. His entire family was Muslim. When he came to Jesus, they all turned their backs on him. Shakuru's father was visiting him for the first time in 10 years. Somehow his heart had softened and he was coming to see his son again. That trip meant a great deal. But here's the thing I want you to consider. When Shakuru came to Jesus, did he know everything that he would have to give up? In that culture, yes, he did. He was fully aware, and he still followed Jesus. He gave up so much, but if you were to ask him, was it worth it? Was it worth it? Shakuru would tell you without any doubt, any hesitation, yes. Following Jesus is worth it. Remember that when times are tough. We're following the right guy. We're on the right path, the right course. Sometimes there are going to be storms, and sometimes it feels like those storms are going to overcome us and we're going to drown. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes we do drown, but we still have Jesus. We still have him to look forward to. You're on the right path. Hang in there. Stay strong. Be positive, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.